And I have a strong opinion on this as well, so this will be a good twofer.
Yes, and who knows which direction this is going to go. I'm actually quite excited by this.
So we are all biased. Everyone is biased. We all have unknown biases. We have those cognitive biases or distortions. There's over 200 documented cognitive distortions which alter how we see the world around us. And that doesn't just include how we see other people, it also includes how we see ourselves.
Something may have been, in quotes, the right thing for a company like a Microsoft or an Apple
Meta
to do,
or whatever. Yep.
Right? But they've got their own reasons why that's the right thing, and they're not your reasons, right? They're not their company is not your company. Mm-hmm. And so the simple answer to the question should be like, well, I've seen other people do layoffs, why aren't you doing layoffs? Would be, well, that's because they're a different company to us, right?
And research shows over and over again that if you have women in leadership, you're actually more successful as a business. If my only measure is who's following me, I have seen that erupt in bullying behavior, narcissistic leadership, etc.
Hello, and welcome to what is our first for us at Humanity Working, our first ever live recording of a podcast. So with it, joining me today is somebody who's actually been on the Humanity Working podcast just a few weeks ago, Dr. Alessandria Polizzi, and I'm really, really happy to have her back because we got so many questions related to your last appearance, Al, and we thought, what better way to address them but than by having one of these live recordings. So welcome along, Al.
Thank you so much for having me back. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so really looking forward to today. And first off, a big thank you because we actually put out a little bit of a call for questions for this recording before we started. And frankly, we kind of got overwhelmed with them. There were a ton of questions that came through, all of them really, really good. And before we get to them, though, I want to talk a little bit about the title of this session, why it is that we're calling it what it is, even like a little bit of the debate that we had about whether we should call it this, and the response we got. So for those of you that are just like driving along in the car and haven't noticed what this thing is called and it just popped into your feed, the title of this session is How Not to Suck as a Leader. And it was kind of interesting because when I put out the call for comments on this, Al, and for questions, I would say about 95 to 98% of people responded with something along the lines of, great title, here's my question. And about 1 to 2% of people were like, well, that doesn't resonate with me at all, or I don't think you should be talking about leadership like that. So and I thought it was very, very interesting. We even had one person, for example, who responded and said, yeah, I've been in this field like 20, 30 years. I don't need to be told anything like that. So really curious as to why, I know obviously the background to this discussion, but maybe you could just talk a little bit about why we would even go there, why we would talk about it in these terms.
Well, I think one, according to all the latest research in Gallup, 80% of managers are rated as poor. So most people probably are sucking as a leader, unfortunately. And also, we wanted something a little cheeky, a little to kind of stick out from the crowd, not your regular like top 3 ways you can lead effectively or whatever. Because what I notice and what we'll talk about that's different in how, at least with Verdant and our conversations around leadership, is that we focus also on the inside of the leader and how they can take care of the human side of being a leader. And so a lot of what we see around leaders is all about the head. And we're going to talk a little bit about the heart.
Yeah. That's so interesting about the comment about leaders being rated as poor, because that's against a backdrop, Al, where huge sums of money, certainly when you total it all up, right? There's a lot of people in the world, so if you total anything up, then there's going to be a lot of money spent on stuff. But there is actually quite a lot of money spent on leadership development, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And again, having been in leadership development for over 20 years, like the person who responded, I can match that. Uh, a lot of it isn't really, it's recycled the same things, and it's a lot of it is telling leaders what they should be doing and not giving them tactics around how to do it. And
Mm.
so I think a lot of what I'd like to talk about, what we'd like to focus on, is tell me how. Tell me not just why I should do X, but how to do it in a way that matches my style, and who I want to be as a leader.
Okay, so let's get into the details. We'll go into some of the questions right away. The question that I wanted to start with, and we'll kind of go back and forth here. Al, you can ask me a question after I ask you one. But I rather like this one. So it's from Adrian Boucher. Apologize if I've mispronounced your name. So, and I'll take that as a blank. By the way, please take it as a blanket apology for me butchering any name that comes forward.
I don't know
Um,
what it's like to have people mispronounce my name at all. That ever
Oh yeah, I can
happens.
imagine that, Al. Yeah. And by the way, even listing out your, like, we had a slide for those people that are attending this live. We had a slide with your LinkedIn profile,
I know it had to have two
and it goes
lines.
on and
I
on and
know
on and
this. I
on.
know.
Anyway, but Adrian Boucher is the as professor and director of the Voss Sport Business Management Program. So thanks so much, Adrian. And love this question. I think it's probably going to be in your wheelhouse. Are leaders born or made? If they can be made, what type of temperament do people need to have to be effective leaders?
So I get this question a lot, by the way. And the answer is, of course, they are not born, they are made. Because if only we only put people in leadership positions who had the pathway and the look of being a leader, there's just a lot of bias inherent in saying, oh, the people who are in leadership positions are there because they were born to be there. I think that's a belief system that we're trying to dismantle. The thing that I would say is what makes an effective leader. Uh, the first thing I would say is self care, which is probably not something that you're going to hear a lot of people say. I don't mean selfishness, but I mean making sure that they're healthy as a leader and have the emotional agility to be able to navigate the inherent challenges that come with being a leader. And what comes with that is authenticity, ability to be vulnerable, clarity of purpose, which then drives some of these other behaviors that we look for, that have been scientifically proven to be more effective. But it really starts with making sure that they're okay.
Hmm. You know, I think kind of related to that is a question that I get asked around that in a very similar way, which is, well, leaders all seem to look a certain way, right? And there's an image, I think, as to what we think of as a good leader, that has really been embedded for 40, 50, 60 years, right? And you can go back as far as Jack Welch or even before that or whatever, but it generally seems to be like a man in their 50s, who's worked their way up in a certain way, that has a certain set of characteristics.
Certain
And
color,
yeah,
certain amount
exactly.
of privilege and
Yeah,
money. Hmm.
yeah. And so when I start thinking about this question, I think about it in two ways, which is they should not be born into it, but it is certainly true that you were if you look a certain way and seem a certain way, then the likelihood of you ending up there is potentially greater. And you and I have talked about this, but like, there's a reason why X number of almost every president has been a certain height or above.
Hmm.
And so, of course, we're always like dealing with that backdrop, right?
Yep.
But it's got nothing to do with actually what qualities of successful leaders are. And I suppose that's the balance, right?
Hmm.
That we have to strike, right? This interpretation in our heads as to what we think leaders look like, and what they sound like, and what they feel like, right? versus the reality of what it takes to be a successful leader inside an organization.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you're describing is a boss, right? Not a
Yeah.
leader. But
Yeah.
and research shows over and over again that if you have women in leadership, you're actually more successful as a business. Full stop.
Yep.
And so define what a successful leader is then. If a
Yeah.
successful leader is the archetype that we have been able to demonstrate does not ladder back to innovation, productivity, business success, talent retention, you name it, then what we're kind of working against ourselves by limiting our ability to have leaders that are more effective, because that's for whatever we can define that reason for a wide variety of causes. And I shared with you before. I did a session last week on for women in manufacturing on leadership, and one of the studies we found was a study that looked at women experiencing harassment, and what they saw was that actually the higher up you go, the more frequent harassment occurs. So if I'm an individual contributor as a woman, it's probably around 58% of women who experience around the 50% range, which that's gross right there, but it
Mm-hmm.
increases to almost 70% if I'm a woman in power, especially in a male dominated field and with more male employees than not. So there are, and then the other thing that is not helping us is if we don't see examples of leaders who look like us, then it's hard to see that as a possibility. So another data point is that, out of 20 executives, 4 of them will be women, and or out of 16, I'm sorry, 4 will be women, and 1 will be a woman of color.
Mm.
So we just don't see those opportunities. And one of the articles I was reading around this calls it not the career ladder or the glass ceiling, they call it the broken rung, which
Mm.
being given the opportunity to be mentored as a leader, to be supported as a leader, there's just so much behind what has limited the ability for people who don't look like you to
Yeah.
to not have the opportunities to be able to lead.
So what you're describing is, in a sense, a set of additional obstacles
Mhm.
that people who don't look a certain way and don't behave a certain way have to go through versus other people that were born into different circumstances, I guess would
Absolutely.
be the
And so
case.
this is why where I like to start is with the leader as a human and understanding the emotional weight of that.
Mhm.
So if I am one of those folks, right? I have been in leadership positions for the last 10 years, minimum. And so I'm put in those positions. Now I just shared with you, there's a high likelihood there's going to be bias about me. There's going to be potential higher risk for harassment. We don't talk about those things and the impact that can have on my emotional health, my psychological well-being as an individual human. And so being able to understand what those hazards can be for me as a leader is incredibly important, because it's the equivalent of me walking into, a toxic spill without
Mm.
understanding how it could create harm or how it could injure me. So that's why I think it's really important for us to talk about these things, make leaders aware of them, and then give them the skills and capabilities to navigate these very complex and psychologically potentially harmful impacts on them as humans.
By the way, for those of you listening on audio, I'm not snoring while
I tried him
while Alice
over.
while
I did
Alice
try him
talking here.
over. Yeah,
Yeah,
here she is. Here she
Al's
is.
Al's very cute dog is with her and has decided that it's not interesting enough for her, but
This
but
is a
hopefully it is
pug's
for everybody else.
job. This is her. She's doing her job, which is snoring. That's her job.
Absolutely right. Yeah. All right. What you got for me, Al?
Yeah, so let's kind of continue to build on that definition of what it means to be a leader. So there's a great question that we received from Michael Boyink from Driven to Wonder. and he talks about the type of leader. He talks about leadership charisma and public speaking, which I think is part of this archetype. So the
Hmm.
question is the reduction of face-to-face time and presenteeism, I would kind of take that out, but presenteeism surfacing another or new type of leader that is less dependent on charisma and public speaking abilities? Is this a new opportunity for introverts to become leaders?
Yeah, this I find is fascinating because it really talks to the nature and the way in which work is changing. And so often when you start to think about the various different ways in which work is changing, there's some really obvious ways, and then there's some kind of subtle ways, right? So really obvious ways, a great example would be like, oh my goodness, there's been this explosion of AI, and and all of a sudden everybody's using things like ChatGPT in order to be able to do their work. And then very clearly and obviously, there's been an explosion of companies that are tech companies or software companies. If you were to look at the Fortune 500 today, it's a huge amount, numbers of it are dominated by software companies with significant profit margins, and less so of more of what you would consider to be more, if you like, the traditional companies that would have dominated it even 30, 40 years ago, something along those lines. So those are examples of really obvious changes that are happening in the workplace. But while all that has happened, there has been this also a period of time, over a period of time, there's been this sort of like gradual but continuous shift in the way in which work is done. That the how, the what, the when, the where, even the why of work, all of those all those things are shifting, and the shift is towards things like unstructured, ambiguous, flexible, agile work with people that themselves are hopefully pretty agile and resilient. And showing up to work itself is a more ambiguous activity. And often it requires more in the way of internal or intrinsic motivation than it did previously. And often it's less clear exactly what success looks like, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're in the old job, maybe you needed to move X number of widgets over from here to here. And if you did a certain amount in a certain period of time with your structured breaks, you were good. And now that new world of work is very different. Most of the people, for example, that work in our programs, we ask them a simple question like, um, do you keep regular office hours? And huge numbers of people say no, right? And
Mm-hmm.
huge numbers of those people are not getting overtime when they're when they're not doing that, right? And then we even ask them about the where of work, like, do you show up at the same desk every day? And huge numbers of those people say no. So all of that is shifting under us, as we try to, if you like, make sense of work. So if you think about it, if all of that is changing, right, it's very logical and natural that the types of skills that are required by leaders to excel in those types of environments are themselves going to be somewhat different, right? If, for example, you're a leader that was accustomed to bringing everybody in the office and doing the rah rah in front of everybody in front of the office, and now you've got a workforce that is distributed across space and distributed across time and rarely gathers physically, you need a different set of skills in order to be able to work effectively with them. So I think the short answer is that this is an opportunity for people that are wired differently, to be more successful inside organizations, to use different communication mechanisms, to bring people together in different ways, and to do all the necessary work of a leader. Um, but by the way, throughout history, there have been successful introverted leaders. So it
Mm-hmm.
was never. Again, we come back to this idea of what the image is of a leader, but it's never been the case that it's impossible to be a leader if you're introverted. It absolutely is possible, though, to use the fact that all of this is changing and to take your skills and apply those skills to lead really well in that type of environment.
Yeah. I like how you described it as changing underneath, underneath us, because it's not something that we just all of a sudden, okay, let's all switch and we'll get trained on these things. And I would say, if your methodology for managing people before was by keeping your eyes on them and monitoring their work, you weren't doing it right anyway.
Yeah.
So it was time for you to change, and this is a good catalyst or forcing function to help you find new ways of working and new ways of leading.
All right, I got another one for
Oh,
you.
okay.
Let's go with. Oh, I like this one.
Oh boy.
Uh, there's actually two here that I think connect really well. So the first is from Amy Granick, who's director of marketing at Bethel Synagogue, and the second is from Zach Ratner, friend of the show, has been on the podcast, and CTO and co-founder at Yembo. So the first question is centered around how leaders can cultivate empathy in their leadership style while also maintaining professionalism. And the second is how can leaders effectively balance empathy and authority? So those are different views on the question in the same way. The way I think about it is like there's this here's the way it's been put to me, right? There's this sort of thing that you're supposed to be empathetic, but I don't really understand how empathy and professionalism or empathy and authority relate. So I hope you can talk about those.
Yeah, absolutely. The best place to start is by being clear about what your purpose is as a leader, and being really grounded in that, because that can help drive both empathy, vulnerability, authenticity, openness, and boundaries, clarity of purpose, expectation setting, um, tough conversations, etc. Because if you're grounded in your why, right, what is my purpose for being a leader, that is your touchstone for everything you do, and you're guiding your guiding direction for what you choose to focus on and what you do not. So, for example, let's say, what would you say, actually, Paul? If you had to pick one word to describe what you would like to be known for as a leader, what would it be?
Hmm. That's a really good question. You can tell we haven't
No, we
practiced this,
didn't. It's
right?
just
Because
first word that comes to mind.
well, I'm biased because I think I would say followers, but the reason that I'm biased is because another friend of the podcast, I just interviewed him the other day for something called a
One
book
drop.
that I'm holding up right now, One Drop of Poison, and it's written by Sean Lemson. And Sean asks a question of his leaders, and he says, what is a leader? Is the question he always asks them. And he thinks there's one right answer to that, which is a leader is someone who has followers, which is
But
interesting
towards
because
where you need to be
exactly.
following you
Right.
toward a goal or a direction. So tell me
Yes.
where you're headed.
So
One word.
yeah, I'm gonna go vision,
Vision.
but yeah, but I don't know. It's
Okay.
interesting.
Yeah.
And it's
So
weird that I'll tell you what though, isn't it weird that I don't know the answer to that
I
off the top
know.
of my head?
Yeah, exactly. Well,
Yeah.
and that's so, I when I teach leadership classes, one of the things I do, I use the picture of Ted Lasso's sign above his
Yeah.
door. For those of you who haven't seen it, he's a coach for a UK football team, and it says "Believe."
Yeah.
So I say, what would be on your door, right? So some words that have come up have been empathetic, curious, creative, authentic, supportive, all kinds of different things that people see themselves. What do I want to be known for as leader? Why do I lead? And so let's just say toward yours is vision, right? So
Mhm.
so that gives you a great place to start when it comes to making connection with your team around what is the vision, getting people behind the vision, making sure it's clear, aligning everyone, having everyone feel like they're part of the vision. And when people are doing behaviors that are counterproductive to the vision, like undermining the team or not meeting their deliverables, etc., the conversation you can have is, again, still tied back to what's most important and you've been very clear about. So this is why I think it's important for us as leaders to be able to articulate what do I want to be known for
Yeah.
as a leader. What is my purpose in leading people? It can't just be to get people to follow me, because again, that's a boss, and it needs to be about but in how. It's the how. So
Yeah.
having that, and the reason I say that isn't because it's something I just made up. It's because the scientific research shows when we are connected to our purpose, we are better able to navigate challenges, be able to drive clarity, align people, drive innovation. It helps us with our own internal management of emotional agility, resiliency, etc. And as we talked about earlier, if you are a person who is a non-traditional looking person in your field, it also can help bolster you against the biases that may already exist about you as an individual. So there's psychology and scientific research behind being really clear about your why.
Yeah, and just for a sec to kind of like defend Sean's view of the world on this, which I think is interesting,
Oh, I'm
right?
not attacking
So,
it.
oh no, I know. But I think what's really interesting about that and what he goes actually into the book in some detail is that what he's really talking about is that successful leaders have followers. So sort of
Mm-hmm.
like a statement of fact, right? So in other
Mm-hmm.
words, you can behave in a certain way. You can even behave in a certain way where you try to recruit followers, right? And you may or may not be successful at that. But it's true to say that if you're leading a company and nobody buys into anything that you're doing, you're not being a successful leader. So there has to be. So in other words, for him, it's almost like a measure, right? And now, do you go out and actively seek it? Not necessarily, but do you behave in certain ways where you're gathering followers as a result of what you're doing? That's somewhat different, I think.
Yeah, I think so. I've seen leaders who are more focused on finding followers than leading.
Yes.
So I've been a front row seat to that,
Yep.
and that tends to be more kind of authoritarian leadership, more narcissistic leadership
Yes.
leadership behaviors that are about me and following me. And if you don't follow me and do what I say, then you're not really part of it. So I'm not saying that he's saying that in his book at all,
No.
but I'm just saying that if my only measure is who's following me, I have seen that erupt in bullying behavior,
Oh yeah.
narcissistic leadership, etc.
Yeah, it's almost like the equivalent of like being obsessed with your followers on social media or whatever.
Yes,
It
exactly.
has its own challenges associated with
Exactly.
that.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
as we're chatting about Sean, why don't you? I know that he had a question that you wanted to ask me. I think, right?
I Yes, absolutely. So what he had here was companies seem to be becoming more and more comfortable laying off and reorganizing employees seemingly at the drop of a hat. What is the impact of this behavior on a company's ability to innovate and recruit talent? And I have a strong opinion on this as well, so this will be a good twofer.
Yes, and who knows which direction this is going to go. I'm actually quite excited by this one. So, um, first off, I think it's actually relatively complicated. The question about whether companies are becoming more comfortable laying off and reorging at the drop of a hat. I think certainly in tech, that's we're seeing a bit more of that. And I think there's a few reasons behind that, right? And a lot of them actually have nothing to do with leadership, but it's worth being aware of them. So I mentioned early on, we've got this AI thing that's going on, right? And in our research, what we've seen a lot of is that the tech companies that obviously probably have a deeper understanding as to what the AI revolution is going to mean for them, they're starting to think quite deeply about, okay, what does that mean in terms of the number of people I need, the type of people I need in order to be able to maximize
Mm-hmm.
the opportunity for my company in this new world. And I think the one thing, whether you think this is morally correct or not morally correct, is separate, right? Is a separate question. But it is true to say that I think many of the tech companies have got their heads around just how revolutionary this AI wave that is just beginning. In fact, I've been giving talks recently about AI, and I've been struck by, in many cases, in some cases, how few people have even used it, which is amazing. as in use the generative AI stuff. Yes, about half of us are using it on a day-to-day basis, but that means about half of us are not, right? And so that to me is amazing. But it's also, I would true to say, I first started like doing work for money when I was very young. I was a child programmer in the mid 80s, and I have never seen a technology revolution that I think is more impactful or will be more impactful than this one. And so the tech companies are intrinsically get that, and are restructuring in order to be able to take advantage of that. That's my belief as to sort of like the why it's happening. And then I think there's this sort of group of other companies that are looking at the tech companies laying off 10,000 people here and 15,000 people there and going, whoa, 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 what does this mean? Right. And in many of those companies, what I've seen is, well, we don't know exactly what we're going to do around learning and development. We're going to pull back our investment in people. We don't really know if we're going to lay off a bunch of people, so we're going to pull back and investing in the people that we've got, and we're going to try and figure all of this out. So I say that to a point as to sort of like what's the backdrop in my what do I believe is the backdrop, and what am I hearing from leaders as to explain what's going on in terms of the layoffs and the various other things that are happening. The second part of the question is, I think, really more as interesting or more interesting, which is what is the impact of this behavior on a company's ability to innovate and recruit talent? I think it depends hugely on what the company is. If you are, this is just a fact, if you are Microsoft or Apple or many of the, or let's say Google, and you laid off 15,000 people today, and in a month you tried to recruit another different 15, 20,000 people, you would have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of applications for those jobs. Why? Because people still want you on their resume. They still want that. They want to say, hey, I can, I worked for Microsoft for this period of time. And I know that because I worked for Microsoft for 10 years, right? And there's a feel to that, right? And and every job application that I put out there would have hundreds of people applying for the job, even if it wasn't a spectacular job. So I think for the sort of like top, I don't want to call them top tier because they're not, right? But for this group of companies that have this veneer of innovation and have this veneer of like, we do really interesting stuff, it's probably not going to affect them very much at all. Now, but the mistake I think that we make is that we take that, we look at that, and we look at those types of behaviors in those types of companies, and we go, oh, well, we can do this, we could do the same thing, right? But in reality, if you don't have that cachet, if you don't have that, oh, I want to have that on my resume. If you don't have that, then the other things like how you look after your employees and what you do with your employees and how safe your employees feel to work there becomes much, much, much more important. And I don't think that we always realize that. I don't think that we think that we almost think like we're a mini version of those other companies. We're not, right? We're not a brand in the same way that they are, right? And because we're not a brand, part of our brand to employees needs to be, this is a safe place to work that is fun to work and will look after you and all of those kind of things, which have become much more important. So anyway, that was a long answer, but that's my sort of view of the whole thing.
Awesome. Can I add?
Please.
Okay. So one, it says to recruit, but I would talk about how to retain talent, because research shows that about 10% of your population that you kept will end up leaving as a result of having a layoff. And we, after having done research and worked with several companies who've gone through layoffs in the last 18 months, we have a program we call In a Fog, which looks at the specific reactions that people can have from a psychological perspective when they go through a layoff. Not the people who've been exited, but the people who you've decided to retain. And there are a variety of things that can impact them that would increase their likelihood to depart. The second thing it will do is completely undermine innovation. Because in order to have innovation, I need to be able to take risks and make mistakes, ask questions, learn new things. All of those are undermined when I don't feel safe. And so if I don't feel safe asking questions or making mistakes because I'm afraid I'll be the next one on the chopping block, my innovation decreases exponentially. And so absolutely there's an impact on innovation when we have layoffs. One of the questions I have now, when you talk about the volume of layoffs that you're talking
Yeah.
about, financially, I can see, okay, somebody did some math somewhere and said, yes,
Yeah.
this is the right move. But when we position a layoff as somehow tied to the financial performance of the organization, and it's like 10 people, I question the finances of that business, right? Like
Yeah.
if the salary of 10 people is the difference between you being a business and not being a business, you've got a lot of other problems going on in your
Yeah.
organization. So, that's kind of one of the ones that I'm like, are we being honest about why we're making the decisions we're making? Because I will second your position of a Me Tooism, of, well, and I've seen boards asking, well, everyone else is laying off. What are you doing? Right. And they
Yeah.
feel like they have to because everyone else is, which again, there's no financial back. It's just the board asked. So that's very dangerous to an organization.
Well, and even though I mentioned that I think there are some underlying reasons why some of the big tech companies have been doing some very significant layoffs. Even though that's true, I think that we shouldn't underestimate the ability of large Fortune 10 companies to do stupid things,
Oh yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And and the funny thing is that if you are a Fortune 10 company, what does that mean? That means that you've got way more leeway to do stupid things
Mm-hmm.
before there's a
To turn the
significant
lights out.
impact,
Yeah.
on,
Yeah.
on you as an
Yeah.
organization. So
Yeah.
a lot of the reasons why you kind of look at some of this stuff and kind of scratch your head is because, to your point, right, to the finance person inside the organization, or indeed to stockholders, this can look like a really smart move. And actually, I keep plugging Sean's book here, but there's a really interesting section in there where he talks about the accounting practices and how accounting practices affect the behaviors of firms in ways that can be completely disconnected
Mm-hmm.
to what, in quotes, is the right thing for the organization when you take even a 2-year time horizon or a 3-year time horizon. So that's the other thing to think about when we think about these sort of the Me Too stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, Something may have been, in quotes, the right thing for a company like a Microsoft or an Apple to
Meta or
do,
whatever. Yeah.
right? But they've got their own reasons why that's the right thing, and they're not your reasons, right?
That's
They're
right.
not their company is not your company,
Mm-hmm.
and so the simple answer to the question should be like, well, I've seen other people do layoffs. Why aren't you doing layoffs? Would be, well, that's because they're a different company to us,
That's
right?
right.
It should be like, as we'd say in Britain, simple as, it would be. It's like, I mean, it should be as simple as that, but in many cases, it's not as simple as that because of this sort of Me Too
Yeah,
uh,
I have to match
tourism.
the big dogs. So I actually, can I do another question? Because we've got
Oh
12
yeah,
minutes. Are we
yeah.
doing this until 12 more
We
minutes?
we got we got 12 more minutes, and we should
Okay.
probably rush through a couple of them. But yeah,
But I have a
actually,
question.
I want to ask you one first. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's from Philippos Savidas, who's the friend of the show and director of the venture acceleration at ASU Enterprise Partners. You're going to love this one.
Yeah, I've already been looking at it.
You've been
Yes.
licking your lips over, haven't you? So,
Uh-huh.
visionary leaders are known for pushing boundaries. How can they maintain this innovative drive without losing sight of practical constraints and operational realities?
Okay, so are we doing a 10-minute speed run?
You go.
Yeah, we're going to
Take,
go quickly.
I tell you what, do this one whatever speed you want, and then we'll
Okay.
go a bit faster through some of the other ones.
Yeah. So when we talk about archetypes, one of the archetypes we have is that visionary leaders push boundaries. You can't make an omelet without breaking eggs. Yada yada yada. But the research shows that the more you can be what they call leader management exchange, or the more that you have a give and take with your teams, the more they see you as part of the team, the more authentic you are, the more transparent you are. They call it transformational leadership. These are the skills that have been associated with innovation, not people who run around and yell things or like, oh, we're going to tighten the belt to drive creativity. And yes, constraints can drive creativity, but here's the difference. An effective leader has constraints and pushes ideas. An ineffective leader has constraints and pushes and criticizes humans. So I want to have debates about ideas while keeping the humans safe. So it is not personal, right? It's about ideas. And the way you do that is by creating a psychologically healthy and safe workplace.
Yeah, and keeping the humans safe is a foundation to that, right? If you
Yeah,
don't,
absolutely.
yeah, they're not sitting alongside each other, right? You have to, you have to have the.
You cannot have innovation without psychological health and safety. I don't care what model, those are flukes. There's zero studies that show that abusive behavior drives innovation. In fact, I shared with you, I had seen this question. I did a bunch of research. It got me all fired up about it. And, what they identified in looking at driving innovation are all the behaviors I just talked about. There's very little correlation to some of the behaviors we talked about before, authoritarianism, narcissism, et cetera, et cetera. Those don't drive outcomes. They get in the way.
Yeah, and if we had half an hour longer, we'd explain all the reasons why those of you that are listening to this or watching this are going to scream Tesla, Tesla, or SpaceX or whatever. We're going to.
Okay, but tell me. So but hold on. Just because an organization was successful doesn't mean it was as successful as it could have been.
Precisely.
Right. We know
that's
that
the shortcut answer.
that 2 out of every 3, exactly. The 2 out of every 3 projects fail. Every day in business. Okay. What we're doing isn't working. And that costs the business money.
Exactly. Couldn't agree more on that. In fact, I got so excited I nearly turned over the laptop.
The dog snored extra for that.
All right, let's do speed round. You can ask your one. I'm going to try and get all my answers in 45 seconds or less.
Okay, let's go. I'm going to ask you a question that's not on here.
Okay.
How can leaders not suck?
Very good. I would say they start by understanding themselves better. I would say that there's a huge gap, particularly among men, in terms of men actually sort of wanting to go there and understand who they are, what they mean, what's important to them, and whether they want to be a leader. Right. So in many cases, people's motivation for being a leader. We talked about the idea of like gaining followers just for, right? That's one of it. But also the other thing is that we're often brought up with ourselves, either it's driven from within or from our parents, from our friends. They're like, oh, you're a CEO material or whatever. And suddenly it becomes like this sort of like natural thing that you should do because you're not fulfilling your potential if you don't do it. Not everybody wants to be a leader. Not everybody's cut out to be a leader. Some leaders should be like super ICs or whatever. So understanding what it is about yourself that means that you want to do this. Are you wanting to do this for the right reasons? Is this something that you can contribute? Is this something that will fulfill you if you do? And investing in that is a huge starting point, I would say.
Can I add?
Yes.
So, 45 seconds, less than that.
Yeah.
Practicing self-compassion is actually one of the biggest things you can do to differentiate yourself as a leader and to not suck. And that's counterintuitive because that sounds selfish. But when we're kind to ourselves, we actually activate the nurturing parts of our brains that enable us to even be able to take care of our teams. So if we are taking away from ourselves, if we're sacrificing ourselves, if we push ourselves to burnout, research shows that wreaks havoc on the performance of our teams. So self-sacrifice, and then of course those high ego behaviors we talked, or those dark behaviors we talked about, those are unproductive. Making sure that you're healthy is one of the best ways that you can not suck.
Okay. So I'm going to ask you a couple of ones
Oh,
around. Let's see. I think I like
I
this
want to get to
one.
the bias one.
All right. Where's the but? Why don't you ask it of yourself?
Okay, here we go. Hey, Al. Yes. So Stella Brockbank from Chewy actually sent this one in, which is, how does implicit bias in leadership affect team dynamics and decisions?
Oh, that is a good one. Yeah.
A lot. There's my 2-second answer. So you cannot have. So we are all biased. Everyone is biased. We all have unknown biases. We have those cognitive biases or distortions. There's over 200 documented cognitive distortions which alter how we see the world around us. And that doesn't just include how we see other people, it also includes how we see ourselves. So if I do not, so things like imposter syndrome can be
Mm,
very detrimental for a leader and undermine the dynamics of the team, because an unconfident leader, or a leader who doesn't feel like they have self-worth, will destroy relationships within the team. Obviously, having bias about people on your team is a no-go, but I feel like we talk about that more openly. What we don't talk about is either the biases that we have toward ourselves and how we should feel as a leader versus how we do feel, or the biases that people have about what a leader means to them. Because in many cases, we're repeating old patterns of power dynamics, be it seeing your leader as similar to a teacher, a parent, a friend, a hero,
mm.
a villain. Um, that dynamic also comes into play.
Very good. I will not add anything to that, so we can get through some other ones. I think it's brilliant. Let's. I'm going to give you a couple as well, though, a couple of additional ones, and these are both sort of similar. So the first one is from Becky Ferrone, again, friend of the show, who's the founder of Fireworks Coaching. Hi, Becky. And also from Catherine Munn, who's a freelance product leader. I'll give you both of them, and then you can just take it how you want. So, how do leaders who want to best support their teams do so when they don't agree with the direction or messaging coming from above them? And how do you navigate through situations where you don't agree with your direct reports' working or thinking style? Um, and so this is kind of interesting. It's about one's coming from above and one's coming from
Yeah.
below, but it's almost like you've got your own set of values, as it were, and they're disconnecting with what's happening above you or below you.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I'm going to go back to understanding your why. As long as you're still connected to the values of what you're trying to achieve, the how shouldn't matter, because there are multiple ways to get to the same destination. And so sometimes we get real stuck in, oh, well, this is the only way. If your disagreement is from a values perspective, right? If you believe that the decisions being made don't align with your values as a leader, you have to be really careful, because having to toe the line is one of the psychosocial hazards that's been identified by the WHO.
Mhm.
Values misalignment can increase the likelihood of you burning out. And I would say the same as when you lead your team. Often when we delegate or we try to direct how work gets done, we hinder our teams from innovation and being able to come to the table with ideas. Adults want to share their ideas, but as long as we're clear on the how, on the why, and those guiding principles of what we're trying to accomplish, then that should help kind of clear the path for the conversation. But you have a right to have those conversations as well.
Okay, you're
I have
doing
one
such
for
a
you
great job on
though.
these.
I have one
Okay,
for
all
you.
right, you ask me one then.
Okay. There's several here about generational differences.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So, uh, from Diane Cody, she's CEO of Nova Modus.
Hmm.
And is there an effective way to get educated on generational differences so you can be an effective leader across all generations?
Yes, employ them and learn from them. I mean, I think I mean, a book, no, not really. And I think that the other the other aspect is I think we simultaneously try to simplify this and overcomplicate it at the same time, if that's possible. But I think it is, right? Because if you think about this, and we've seen this throughout our work, right? There are two things that are going on at once, right? In the first case, you have like a generational zeitgeist or whatever it is you want to call it, which is like you're in this generation, things feel different to your generation than they do to other generations, and that follows kind of a universal trend, right? So we're always changing and shifting or adapting to what's gone before us, and for our life experiences and our shared life experiences. And as you and I have discussed before, Al, I mean, there's this very, very dramatic event that has happened to all of us, which is COVID, which is part of that, feeding into part of that. But previous generations would argue, well, if you're in America, there was 9/11. There was the Great Crash. There have been all these various different things that have been impactful for us within our generation. But anyway, you're in a generation. Your generation has a certain set of characteristics associated with it, and there are some interesting differences associated with it. But we can learn from those by having people in our company and learning from them. But the second aspect of this as well is that as generations move through the workforce, then the nature of who you are as a human and your circumstances change dramatically. So if you're 5 years away from retirement, your view of work, even though you're the same human, right, you're still part of gen whatever it is, right, your set of motivations are different because now you're closer to retirement. You've got unique financial circumstances and all that kind of stuff. Maybe you've got parents that need looking after or kids that need bringing up and so on. And so your journey through the workforce changes you. So these generational traits are not fixed. They're a journey that people are working through. So I think it really does come down to treat everybody with respect inside your organization. Don't make stupid assumptions that young people today are crap compared to the generation that or anything along those lines. Treat them as people, learn from them, and adjust and adapt your leadership style based on the needs that they have. I think it's as simple as that.
Nice. Agree.
All right. So, wow, that was just like a whirlwind tour. Apologies to all the people whose questions we did not get to. There were a ton there, like Ali Green's question, for example, I really loved. I'm going to do like a one-word answer to that. One belief that is no longer serving leaders. Why is this belief still being held, and what should people do to change? Actually, I'm going to throw that at you. What's one belief you think that is no longer serving leaders?
That I have to sacrifice myself in order to protect my team.
Love it. All right, we'll go with that one, Ali, and hopefully that was helpful for you. And I think we'll with that we'll leave it there. Gosh, I enjoyed this. I hope you did. I hope you did, Ali, and I hope our audience did as well. We'll probably do more of these. If you found the sort of Q&A format really useful, then please send in questions, send in ideas for different podcasts that we're going to do. But thanks for joining me, Al, and look forward to continuing the discussion with all those that sent in their questions.
Thanks so much.